Our bodies come in different shapes and sizes, so doesn't it make sense that our weight loss plan should too? Noom builds a personal plan that factors in dietary restrictions, medical issues, and other personal needs so your plan works for you. One of the things I love about Noom is that it doesn't feel restrictive. Instead of focusing on what you can't eat, it helps you develop a healthier relationship with food. You can still enjoy your favorite treats in moderation, which makes it a sustainable approach that I can actually stick to. If you're looking for a personalized weight loss program that actually works, I highly recommend giving Noom a try. It's a program that's helped me achieve my goals and feel better than ever. Stay focused on what's important to you with Noom's psychology and biology-based approach. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Go check out Noom today.
If you're hearing this in your Rolls Royce, then Donald Trump's tax plan is for you.
You're rich as hell. We're going to give you a tax cut?
But for everyone else, there's Kamala Harris's plan.
Under my plan, more than 100 million Americans will get a tax cut.
Because that guy in the Ferrari doesn't need another break. But Kamala Harris knows you sure could use one. Paid for by FFPAC, ffpac.org. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.
All right, so we're back with Ken and Mike on My Uncles Escaped Alcatraz, and today we have a listener questions that we're going to be answering. So we got a bunch of questions from our listeners. Thank you for responding so quickly. Mike was great enough to put all these together, and we're just going to say your first name, so we know we're not going to say your last name. As far as that. So, but before we get into that, guys, what's new? Have you heard anything new? Do you get any kind of, when you saw these questions and the feedback, how does that make you feel that people are really kind of intrigued with this story or fascinated?
Well, one of the things for me that I was pleasantly surprised was a number of the people who wrote us are from other countries. One from the Netherlands, one from Norway, and one from Australia.
Wow.
So we're getting, and those are the ones that ask questions. You know, obviously there are many, many more people out there. I mean, our Facebook site has 6,000 followers. So obviously this is international. So there's a strong interest in the story, not just here in the US. People know about it. They want to learn more, and they're very enthusiastic in their responses of how much they love the show. They love the podcast. They listen to it every week. They learn all kinds of interesting things, and just as we are, you know, we're all learning new things, and we talked off air. I won't go into details, but new things are happening. So it's the story that is building, and we're really excited where it's taking us.
Yeah,
I'll agree with Mike. I've always been intrigued by how many people outside the country is interested in the story. I have one individual who he emails me religiously every Thursday morning. Is there a podcast coming out today? I can't wait for it. And he always responds with how much he loves it. He shares it with other people. It's kind of become, you know, like a tradition now. Every Thursday, people are looking for this podcast. And two, I think every one of the questions are coming from people that have actually read the book. Rather than sometimes you got people that just kind of follow it, but don't really hadn't invested the time in to read the book. And so now this book is having questions come up in people's minds. So it's kind of exciting to answer these questions.
and I saw from your Facebook group that people are finding the books in bookstores and finding them on the shelves, which is great.
Right. Well, and libraries too. Now, believe it or not, I had a friend here in Panama City that went to the local library, and our book is in the library. So, you know, people now can check it out and read it. So very, very interesting.
That's fantastic. And also, I want to acknowledge that my wife Cindy's here for the first time in a couple weeks.
Sorry, I've been gone. I've been working on location, filming a show, and I'll tell you about that later.
Ask questions like, "Where are you? How come?"
I know. I should have said something before.
We can't talk about it. The authority said we can't speak of this.
It was just a little crazy filming and trying to do this at the same time, so I had to take a little break.
But I'm
back.
Yeah. And hopefully we're going to have some really good announcements for you guys soon relating to this story in the book and what we're trying to do to get the message out there, and also to find answers to what happened to John Clarence and Frank Morris, and whether or not they did make it. I think we make a really good case here, as well as Ken and Mike's book makes a fantastic case that, they did make it and they did live out their lives in South America. But, our next, chore and quest, if you will, is to make sure we can kind of prove that definitively. And we're putting people in place that can help us do that. And like I said, more announcements to come with that. And I'm putting together a pretty high profile team. So we'll be sharing that with you hopefully soon, as soon as all that comes together. But let's get to some of these questions. Now, some of them we're going to be kind of cagey with, because we don't want to reveal too much information, because number one, we can't confirm it yet, and we have strong suspicions. And others that, we just, we're kind of holding back until we got all our ducks aligned in the row. But this one comes from Justine, and her question is, or Justin, I guess it's Justin, not Justine. And sorry, I can't read it.
Start over.
So this is from Justin. Is Clarence the one on the deed of the farm, the son of Clarence? Since it said Clarence to Clarence, so maybe Clarence signed the property over to his son before he passed away. And that's a really good question that we don't know the answer definitively yet, too. Right. But we're working on finding that one out. And as I alluded to just before, that we put together a team that's an investigative team that is going to help us find all that stuff. To try to get paperwork down there is we have to work with the local authorities there, and it's been a bit of a red tape there. But I think we're in a really good position to answer that question. But what do you guys think about that? What do you do in general? What do you think?
Well, I would say, I could definitely see that happening. According to Fred, both of the brothers owned the farm. He never said Frank Morris was part owners of the farm. He did say John and Clarence was. And I could see them wanting to keep this in the family. So at some point in time, yeah, I could definitely see him signing the property over to his son. I don't know how many children he might have had in the end. I do know, when Fred told us about it in 92, and so that would have been back in 75. I believe he had 3 at that time. So, yeah, I could definitely see him turning this property over. And what's exciting too is that the possibility that it's still in their name today, if he did. So it wouldn't be like, I always kind of feared that maybe John and Clarence at some point in time would have sold the farm, took the money, and probably moved. But it does sound like that maybe it's still in the family's name. So it should really kind of help us when we really start digging down there.
It also seems like your family was very tight-knit. I can't imagine that would have ever changed with John and Clarence.
No, they were, they would have been, well, just like my mom. My mom and dad have kept the property they've had now for over 60 years. And, they don't ever want to see it gone. They want it, given to the 3 children. So that value system that John and Clarence had was the same value system that their parents gave them and instilled in them. So yeah, that family oriented, if at all possible, they would have kept it in the family. And as large as it was, now they might have sold some of it. Maybe at some point in time they got to the point that it didn't need it as large as Breezy described it. So whether or not they sold some, I'm not sure. But I am happy to really think about the possibility that it's still kept in the family's name.
Well, to me, it comes down to the name Clarence.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up. With the people that we're looking at and just the searches we're making, the name Clarence has popped up within a family and people. And even in the United States, Clarence is not a common name.
No.
and it's more of it's an older name.
Last time I heard about it was on the Andy Griffin show. It's like you see someone named Clarence or something like that.
Right. It's like in I Love Lucy, Ethel was the character. Well,
Exactly.
Nobody calls her Ethel anymore. It's an old name. And Clarence is one of those names. And to have people that we're finding down there, Clarence within the family, is highly unusual, because in Brazil, it's a Portuguese culture, and Clarence is not a Portuguese name. So why would family members name children Clarence?
It's not even a remotely Latin name at all.
No.
Right. So that's very promising to have a family member with that name, or members, I should say, with that name, that is a very strong lead. And anyway, we'll see where it turns up, but it's very hopeful that that's going to get us where we need to go, because as people have said, or you've said, we've made a very compelling case. We have a lot of areas of proof that we've looked at, but we don't have that nail in the coffin. We don't have that this is absolutely irrefutable evidence of who they are. And that's what everyone's wanting from us. And that's what we want for ourselves. We all want that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to do it. I think the team we're putting together is going to help, and we're going to find out these answers to these questions. All right. So the next one up is from Steve, and he wants to know what happened to Frank Morris. And we've talked a little bit, like speculated a little bit about what we felt like what happened to Frank. We felt like he probably did go down to Brazil with them, didn't stay down there because number one, the brothers were farmers. They could figure out a way to make a living down there.
Mm-hmm.
I think, who was it that, I think Stuart Fillmore, the FBI agent, was talking about the fact that, Frank was a real felon, even though your brothers were felons too, but he was a violent felon. And so, and he only made his way through doing stuff like this. These guys actually, Clarence and John, actually had a skill that they could actually use in order to survive down there. So I think we speculated that, he probably could have went back up to Mexico because he spoke Spanish, and maybe he could have blended in there more well, and then he can kind of find a space for himself. And probably it was a good idea for them to all separate to begin with. You don't want to be clustered together. The brothers are the brothers. They're used to evading law enforcement and been doing this ever since they were children. But, with Frank, I think it probably was, he probably wanted to make his own way. So what do you guys think?
Well, I would say this. So I thought a lot about Frank when we were writing this book, especially around some of the evidence that was discovered in the Bay. Case in point, the letters that belonged to John Clarence. And it kind of hit me then is like, why wasn't any letters found that was written to Frank Morris? And then I started thinking, Frank Morris was a loner. He had no family, which is kind of sad. He had no one writing him. He had no one that would actually be able to tell his stories later. So maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't know a lot about Frank Morris, is because there's no family members like John Clarence had that kept in touch with him. But we do have three sightings or three pieces around Frank Morris. The first one is Whitey Bulger. Whitey came out and he pretty much said in the letter that all three of them made it, not just John Clarence, and Frank Morris. And then you have the resident down in Brazil that Mike and I spoke to in 2022. He said there were 3 Americans there, 3 American men. That's not 2. So there again, now you have another possible sighting of Frank Morris. And then, of course, you have Fred Breezy. Fred Breezy, when he's telling the family in 1992 about his visit, one of the members of the Anglin family, one of my aunts, I can't remember who it was, I could go back and listen, asked him about the third man. And he said, well, there was this, I'm kind of quoting about how he said it. He said, there was a third American with them. I was never introduced to him, but there was a third American man there. And he was with a blonde-headed woman. So you have 3 possible sightings of Frank Morris. So now, whatever happened to him after 1975, if he stayed there, Whitey kind of indicated one time in a letter that, Brazil was Portuguese and Frank Morris spoke Spanish, which he said multiple times to me that same quote made me kind of think he was trying to tell me he went back into Mexico and possibly out of the country. So, I personally believe Frank Morris made it along with John and Clarence. He went down there. Whatever happened to him after that, I think it's speculation.
Yeah. Well, that picture that you sent me was really interesting too. The picture that of someone that looks, a younger version that could possibly be, a son.
Oh my God! Now, a story around that photo. I probably haven't told you this, but I took that photo one time and I said, I was talking to Art in a text, and I said, Art, have you seen all the photos of Frank Morris? And he goes, yeah, pretty sure. And so I said, have you ever seen this photo of Frank Morris? And I sent him the photo. And he came back and said, wow, no, I haven't seen that photo of Frank Morris before. He actually thought it was Frank Morris. That's
one
how
that
close this person looks like Frank Morris. It fooled even Art into thinking that was Frank Morris.
Is there any possibility that Frank went to Canada? Did you guys find anything in your research about that?
No. The 2 things, well, I have 3 points about Frank Morris. Yeah, because we haven't talked a lot about him on the show. Obviously, we're focusing on the brothers. But, I thought, because when we sent out the query, like, hey, everybody, here's your chance to ask questions that you want to have answered. And we had several about Frank Morris because we haven't talked a lot about him. One of the things that when they were doing the 2015 documentary that Ken was on, the agent, the one after Art, or Michael Dykes, he was desperately wanting the DNA from Ken's family because they had found the bones 9 months after the escape on the beach, some 20 miles away, and they didn't know whose they were, so they buried them. And then, when DNA becomes a possible research tool for identifying people, they reinterred the bones, or not reinterred, they got the bones out, and they did DNA tests on them, and they wanted the family members, both the Morris family and the Anglin family, to submit their DNA to see if they were one of the escapees that had died, and the bones washed up on the beach. And he had said to Ken that they had found some distant family member of the Morris family, like a third cousin or something. And they were able to get his DNA. And so they wanted the DNA from Ken's family. And he tried all kinds of means to get at it, and the family refused. It wasn't until they did the documentary that they finally submitted it in exchange for, examining Alfred to see if he had been tortured to death.
Exactly.
So there is somebody out there, but very, very distant, just enough to make a connection. And evidently that's all he was able to find, was just this one person, because Morris had said, prior to the escape, that his mother had died. And that's really the only family they'd ever really talked about was his mother. And even then he didn't have a very good relationship with her growing up. And he was in foster homes for most of his young life before he started becoming, resorting to criminal activities. So, who that person is, we don't know. They're probably not alive anymore, most likely. So,
I'm sorry if I missed this, but so were they able to extract some DNA from that person?
Yes, they were. Yeah, because when in the documentary at the end of the show, when Art comes to the family, primarily to Ken's mother, and they give the results of the DNA, it was a negative match. It wasn't connected to the Morris family. I'm sorry, the Anglin family. Well, they already knew it wasn't the Morris family. They already knew that. And so then it was, we don't know who this person is now, because it's not connected to the escapees at all.
It was just a body that, somebody drowned, or it could have been an accident or whatever, and his bones washed up on the shore.
Yeah, but it was only one body, so it's
actually, it wasn't even a whole body. It was like a femur. It was, I think it was like maybe 3 or 4 pieces of bone that washed up. And at the time, like as Mike said, they had no way of identifying who it was. DNA that existed at that time, so they buried it in a potter's grave, and they made a notation of it. And Michael Dykes was going through the FBI files when he got the case, and he happened to notice this, and he said, I wonder if there was any, connection to this. So he went and had him exhumed, and from there he tried to test the DNA, and of course didn't get a hit with the Morris family. So then he came after the Anglin family, and eventually we allowed him, once we had Alfred exhumed, they took the DNA out of one of the femur bones of Alfred. So now you have a brother to brother match rather than a sister to brother, and it definitely came back negative. So.
Mm-hmm.
And then two other things about Morris was when we were doing research for the book, we came across a document that the inmates, what they used to be able to do while at Alcatraz was they could request either books from the library, books and magazines. They couldn't go to the library directly. We've talked about the Clint Eastwood movie, and they do accurately portray the library that you had people working there, and then they would go to the cells and give them the things that they've requested. It's not like a library today where we can go in and, I'll take this book with me. They had to request it on paper, or they can buy magazines and books or things of their own. Each inmate had their own little bank account, their own savings account.
Yeah.
That they could put money into, or they worked and they would deposit money on their behalf, and then they can use that money to buy things. And we have a document from Frank Morris where he's ordering books, or excuse me, magazines primarily, to read in his cell. And also one of them is a Spanish book. So, and this was several weeks before the escape. So he was brushing up on his Spanish before going to, for the escape, because, Breezy said that they went to Mexico, and we would believe that they were there for a couple of years, and then, later made their way down to South America. But they were in Mexico for a while. And Morris, spoke Spanish. And also when Alfred died, the FBI interviewed his cellmate when he was at Atlanta, as I recall. Yeah, Atlanta. And one of the things the cellmate said, that he believed that the three were also in Mexico. And he specifically noted that because Morris could speak Spanish and he knew people there, they had spent a lot of time in Mexico, prior to his time at Alcatraz. And that would be a place for him to hide because he can blend in, and he knew the culture, he knew the language. So we have numerous sources telling us the same thing, that Morris would be definitely drawn to Mexico. So they were probably there for a time, go down to South America, and then at least until 75 or so, he's still with the family, he's still with the brothers, and then at some point leaves and probably goes back to Mexico, and we don't know what happened. That's where the trail goes cold. He just kind of disappears, and nothing's ever heard from him again that we know of.
Was I can't remember, was Frank older than the brothers?
Yeah. He was about 5 years old. He was born in 26. Yeah. And
Frank would be pushing 99, actually maybe next year.
Yeah, he'll be.
So
he's 98 today.
Yeah, his part of the case could actually be closed, according to the U.S. Marshals. They don't actually close them; they just quit looking for them.
Yeah, well, I think they
can't even imagine they're looking for Johnny Clarence either.
No. I don't think they are either. They got enough on their hands right now.
I totally agree.
All right, cool. The other one is the follow-up question from Steve is, do you believe both brothers are dead?
Ooh, I've thought about a lot about this one too. I was really shocked when we went to Brazil, Mike and I. There was a man that they had hired to help us to carry gear up onto the mountain that we were going up to investigate the items that we found. And I was shocked that this guy, I got pictures of it. I was shocked that this guy was 95 years old. You look at him and he looked like he was in his 70s. So I do know that the lifestyle down in Brazil is a lot different than here. Now, if they were living in the U.S. with all the processed foods that we eat and unhealthy lifestyle, I would say, yeah, they would definitely be dead by now. But living down there, now I've got a different perspective. They could have changed their lifestyle, and it's possible that one of them's alive. My grandfather lived to be 92. John would be pushing 94, 95. So, it's possible. I'm not going to rule anything out until we get down there. I mean,
Although,
it's very possible when we go down there, we find him so still alive.
Yeah, I would say mostly if either of them are alive, it's probably going to be John because Clarence was a chronic smoker, and
Right.
we've talked about the photograph of the two brothers in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about the cigarettes in Clarence's shirt
Right.
pocket, that you can see the outline of the box in his there. And so he was in the mid 70s, he was still smoking, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So he probably never stopped, would be my guess. He's been smoking since he was probably in his teens, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just the years of the cigarette smoke would would be the end of him at some point. But John, I could see John still being alive.
Mm-hmm.
Theoretically.
But hey, again, my grandfather smoked all his life, all the way up until the day that he died.
Some people it doesn't affect.
Yeah. I mean,
it never impacted him one bit.
No. And that's the thing too. Like my aunt, my grandmother's sister lives in Italy, and she's 91, and you would never know it. Their lifestyle is so different in these other countries, and she can farm and she can do all these things. And my grandmother in America passed away at like 65.
That's what I'm telling you. If someone asked me were they alive today and they were living in the U.S., I would probably say no. But after seeing that individual in Brazil and how healthy he was, and he was like 90, and I actually believe I saw a pack of cigarettes in his pocket. So I'm just saying that the lifestyle, you have to really kind of throw out this U.S. lifestyle.
Yeah.
If
I mean,
you
what's
apply it to them down there?
Yeah. What's the altitude like in that area?
It was very high. So
that's another thing. I mean, her aunt lives in like at the base of the Dolomites in northern Italy, and I think, and they have studies on people who live in high altitudes. They live a long time.
Right, and I mean the food that they ate was so much different than what ours was. So I'm just saying, one of the things I guess we could probably look at if you took an age. I think I took one of the photos of John when he was in Alcatraz, his last photo, and I age progressioned it. Even though it looked like the guy in the 1975 photo, the guy in the 1975 photos actually looked more healthy than the age progression photo that you would have done from someone living in the U.S. So maybe the lifestyle had already started, taking an impact on them.
Well, it sounds like you guys have good genes anyway. You said, your grandfather lived till he was 92. Mm-hmm. How old are you, Ken?
I am 64.
You were 64. Yeah. I mean, you're still competing. You competed in Ironman.
I do Ironmans, I scuba dive, I run races. So.
It's very few 64-year-olds are doing what you're doing. So obviously it's your genetics have served you well and served your family well. Your mom's still alive.
My mom's still alive. And her sister is still alive, who is a chain smoker. So it's anyone, and she survived COVID, having COVID. I just knew that with all the smoking that she did, that COVID was going to do her in, but she overcame it.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty amazing.
Well, and then you do make a good point about the lifestyle, because Fred Breezy said they had a large farm, and he describes the farm of they grew fruits and vegetables, which they sold at the local market. They also have cattle, so they're eating fresh everything. That's their diet, is fruits, vegetables, and their own meat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the thing. They don't have processed food, and there's over 250 chemicals in the EU that are banned that we use here every day in our food,
or even in Canada.
Right. And I would be shocked that most, if not all, of those chemicals are banned in Brazil also.
Absolutely.
No, they are.
Absolutely.
Well, but they're also, they're living in the middle of the country, which is nothing but farmland and vegetation. There's not much there even today, but back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, it was even, obviously more rural than it is today. So they don't have the opportunity to process foods like we do.
Well,
it's all grown
with all the hard work that they were used to. We know that people who work every single day of their life, not easy jobs, but really manual, hard labor. They survive many years longer than someone who doesn't. So.
Yeah.
I say active and fit.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna go another one of Steve's questions, and we're gonna skip one of them, Steve. So because we don't have the information for that, but this one, and we've been talking about this, and we believe that. Well, I'll just read the question first. If the FBI / marshals knew they were in Brazil, why didn't they do anything? And I think we've talked about that quite a bit, as far as what. And we know for a fact that they knew they were down there because you've provided documentation saying that they believe that they're down there. And we heard Art, the former U.S. Marshal, who was tasked later on in the investigation, saying that they worked with Interpol. And then you told me that you have proof that that they marshals were down there. So I think they just they couldn't find them.
Right.
I guess that's what's the key thing. So what do you think about that?
Well, so throw out the U.S. Marshals for a minute. Think about the government. We talked about this with who I think maybe it was Lenny, I guess. But it took the FBI almost over 15 years to turn it over to the U.S. Marshals. Like, why did it take so long? I mean, what was the reasoning why they wanted to wait? I've never heard of a case like an escaped, prisoner from a prison that it took that long to turn it over to the U.S. Marshals. I mean, what was
Lenny stated it pretty succinctly. He said the FBI can't find anything.
But was there a reason why they didn't want to turn it over? Is my question. Is that I've always said that if you had a secret that you wanted to keep, and you knew possibly that this individual knew something that you didn't want shared, well, keep them where you can control them. As long as they're somewhere else, they're not a threat to whatever you're trying to keep.
Sure.
So I think it was a benefit for them to keep them where they were at, and not pursue them. Because at some point in time, they give it to the U.S. Marshals. They don't even give them all of the documents.
No,
the U.S. Marshals have to go back in and rebuild everything.
Yeah, I think he said Art said like there was like 3 pages.
Yeah, and by this time they're already established in Brazil. According to Breezy, 75, they're already married. They already have children. They turned this over to the U.S. Marshals in 79, which means even if the U.S. Marshals had found them down there, they couldn't bring them back. So it's almost kind of like you waited all the way to this point before you ever gave me the case to begin with. Tell me to go get them, but oh, wait a minute, they're in a place now, I can't get them. And if I find them, I can't bring them back anyway.
Yeah.
So
How about
you asked me why. To me, there are so many, it's like Art told me one time, there are so many mysteries about this case, not the escape itself, but all the things that the FBI refused to follow or that they did. And then things that they just didn't, there's so much mystery, not just around the escape itself.
Yeah. Well, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
And the only reason it's in sight right now is because you guys wrote a very compelling case for them, all the information that we've been talking about for the past 25 hours.
Right. I've always said they have always known where they're at. Now, maybe not the actual location, but they've always known where they're at, and it was to their benefit to leave them there.
Makes sense.
I think when we do find them in the near future, we'll find out. I almost feel like there will be other photos that we're going to discover them in their family's possession that's going to kind of back up some of the things that we're saying right now in the book.
And actually, to that point, I was going to mention this earlier and I forgot, so I just remembered. I've often wondered, let's say we find them definitively. John's still alive. We find a son and we do the DNA and it's a match. Whatever we find, that's absolute proof. All the naysayers out there who have said no, they drowned, they didn't make it. You guys are chasing ghosts. How they're going to react to that? What is going to be the response where we say, here you go, we were right all along, you were wrong, even though you were adamant in your position. what it's going to be like for them to say, I was wrong.
Well, hopefully they probably won't make a comment, because usually in those situations they don't. This way, which will mean that they'll still hold on to their, even if we actually find, as you said, definitive proof, I think they'll probably diminish it or rebut it and say, well, that's not it. So, and unfortunately, that's the world we live in, where you can kind of create your own narrative,
Right.
and the government doesn't have to show their cards. They never have to show their cards.
No.
I mean, so, and that's why a lot of times, in all kind of law enforcement investigations, and we've done a lot of them, where, they say the case is an open investigation, and that immediately shuts down any kind of like external investigation, because they can't show information. They can't show their cards, and they'll keep cases open for years just to kind of keep people prying eyes out of it, so they can control the narrative, even if they don't have any progress in the case. We're dealing with 2 cases right now that we've been investigating for a while, and law enforcement's not sharing information, even though we're getting information. And so it's a 2-step. It's like they figure time is on their side. The longer that people don't look into it and don't question it, people will just go away. And as we know, there's so much information in these news cycles that you can get derailed like very quickly. Whether it's a presidential thing, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's the Diddy thing, you have so many things to occupy people's attention that they can kind of just not talk about it and push it down, kick the can down the road. But, they didn't count on you guys writing a super compelling investigative book with all the information. I mean, that's the problem, and then they'll even like you said, when you texted Art, and after he read the book, and what he said, he goes, "Oh yeah, it's a nice piece of fiction."
Yeah, nice fiction.
So, but yeah,
well, it's a book based upon the FBI files, so I guess he's calling all the FBI files fiction.
Yeah. How much time we? I only have I have time for. Here's a question from Norway. This is from, I can't.
Let me see.
See if you can pronounce that first name. Stian.
Yes.
Don't say last name. So Stian is asking, why does Ken's brother say that he's not sure anymore that the picture of the brothers taken in Brazil is the Anglin brothers? He commented this in a post on one of the Alcatraz sites a while ago.
So I don't know if people remember when I told the story about how I found the photo. Real quick, I mean, I was at work. We had just got through wrapping up the pitch with the company that we were going to do the show with History, and it was actually going to be in Seattle. Totally different show. And when I discovered this photo, the first person I showed it to was my coworker right behind me. He was freaking out, going, "Oh my gosh, I see it!" And I shared it with the photo team at the company I worked for, and they were like, I didn't tell them who it was or what I was doing, and they came back, and because I shared 2 different photos, one of John when he was younger, and then that one in 1975. And they came back and said, yeah, this is the same individual. And so I, got my brother and Michael Esslinger on the phone. Neither one of them really kind of believed me at the time, especially Michael. He didn't see it. He was very skeptical. My brother, he kind of was backing me. I think it was only because I was his brother. But so we get the History Channel people on, and I show them, and they freaking out. They're like, okay, we want to do this. And so, all I would say with people who question that photo, I'm an amateur. And every other person who looks at that photo today, like my brother and like other members of maybe the family or whoever else, they're amateurs, just like me. And that's the reason why I said the only way we're going to prove this photo is real is to let professionals look at it. Every single professional that they hired, starting off with Michael Street, who was the very first one in 2015, with the limited tools that he had at that time, he came back with a positive match on John and Clarence, both of them. So I thought, okay, my gosh, this is going to set the record straight. Everybody's going to accept this photo. Oh my gosh, throughout the next few years, people would comment to me like, well, I don't believe it's them, or even like Michael Dyke, he goes into measuring their hands. And I'm like going, wait a minute, guys, why don't we leave this to the professional people who do this for a living?
Yeah.
And so every company that came to us that specializes in looking at a photo, facial recognition, which is the same technology that we use today at airports or any other place you go to, sometimes they're using facial recognition to identify people. It is the way that you identify. And then you bring in Ambrose, who takes the most leading technology at the time, and he explained to us in detail how he did this. All I will say to people is that do not believe me. I'm an amateur. Don't believe anyone else. Believe the professionals. They're the ones who have said the last time it was examined, 99.7% match. That's all I can say about it.
Yeah.
There's always naysayers, everyone. There's always going to be people, even in your own family, we have them, who will just be like, I mean, I lived abroad for 7 years, and there's still people in the family who don't even believe that that's true.
Yes.
So you could give them all the facts and everything, and they're, it doesn't matter. And you're right. Always leave it to the professionals, because you're not a professional. We're not professionals in facial recognition.
No, I will never. I mean, I just, I looked at it and I saw the resemblance. Now, my mom will tell you 100% after I showed it to her. She said, yes, that's my brother. She positively identified.
Yeah.
She said, I know that is my brother. And so that's all I can say. I mean, I can't convince anyone of anything. All I say is don't believe me, believe the professionals.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that, the facial recognition, because they have different hairstyles, they have beard and stuff like that. I have clear at the airport, and I forgot that, like, when I took my clear first picture, I had a baseball hat on and I had my glasses on. Okay. And so it still recognizes me completely. And there's other people I've known who have had beards and shaved, and it recognizes them completely. So the technology works.
It does. And just like Ambrose kind of told us about how your iPhone today works, right? You could hold that phone up to your face, and it scans your facial ID, but then you can put a pair of sunglasses on and it still recognizes you.
Yeah.
So I have no doubt that this technology that they're using today took that photo, just like Ambrose said, not only did they take a photo of John in the past and compared it to the photo in 1975, but they also took a photo of John in the age progression that all the way up until what it would have been, say, 1975, and that still made a match. And then they took, as he explained to us, these points on your face, you can't manipulate that. Otherwise, how in the world are we opening our phones up today?
Exactly. And, and that's the funny part, is that, the government uses facial recognition for everything, to find fugitives, to identify people, for IDs and all this stuff. And then, when you present this information, you said, well, there's still a doubt that it could be them, but if it was someone that they had an interest in pursuing and building a case against, and they would probably say, oh, well, yeah, well, it works. So it's all part about what their motivation. So there is, unfortunately, technology doesn't take into consideration bias.
Correct.
So that's where we are. Okay. Looks like we have probably time for like one more here. This one is from Patrick. And Patrick says, is there a picture of John's wife taken in Brazil? If so, why hasn't it been circulated to find out who she is and where she went?
So yes, the photos that Fred Breezy gave us shows a picture of Fred standing next to a Brazilian woman right next to a phone booth. And he said that this was John's wife. So we do have a photo of her. We are going to use it, hopefully in the near future, to help identify this lady. And in fact, we actually believe we have identified her through other means, but we don't want to share that yet.
Okay, cool.
So, I will say it's the person that we're thinking is possibly her is a very good match. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. Hopefully, maybe we'll be able to share something in the near future.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then Patrick also says, also the audio of Fred Breezy from 1992. Why hasn't it been released so we can hear what was said, like Helen claiming she spoke to John after the escape? And I think you guys played it on the one documentary, right? Did you play some of it?
Well, some. So not on the documentary with, I don't call it what we did with Josh Gates, a documentary. That was more of an adventure.
Yeah.
The History Channel, they did play like a 10, 15-second clip, but this is a 45-minute recording that we have. Look, actually over 45 minutes. And it's very hard to kind of hear. And the U.S. Marshals during the show, they took it and ran it through this audio enhancer to kind of drown out some of the back noise. The one thing the Anglin family is very good at, that's talking. Like when I'm sitting there listening to the tape, I'm yelling at my relatives, can y'all please be quiet so I can listen to what Fred is saying, because they're all talking over him, and it's really kind of hard to hear Fred sometimes. But I don't know. There are some things that I think we want to keep to ourselves about this recording, because it will aid us. It aided me and Mike. It enabled me to find the location, and because of certain things that Fred said on there.
Yep.
And so I definitely do not want to release that right now.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And I think we touched a little bit about that on the podcast earlier. And, because obviously, we love releasing audio recordings. We do it on all the time, and it just kind of validates what we're doing. But it will be released at the appropriate time when we get the information that we need. What was it? Here's one. It says, did Ken receive an FBI file that shows Robert Anglin telling Alfred that Mickey Cohen helped them with the boat and they made it?
Well, so I have all of the FBI files, and that particular document that they're referring to is redacted, but with the help of some individuals inside of the U.S. Marshal, I was able to get that unredacted. So yes, we know for a fact that it is Uncle Man. It doesn't say Uncle Man, it says Man, which is my uncle, which is the only brother that ever visited Alfred in the Atlanta penitentiary. That can be documented. And yes, he is the one who told Alfred that Mickey Cohen is the one who set up the contract for the boat. So yes, he is that, and we do have that, and we can back that up.
That's interesting. That's really good. Yeah, and I think we talked about that.
And we've talked about, how in the world would my Uncle Man even know who Mickey Cohen was? I mean, why in the world would he even say that?
It's ridiculous. He wouldn't.
What did Uncle Man, what did he do for a living at that point in his life?
He was a construction worker. He drove heavy equipment. He worked outside all of his life. So, but another interesting thing about what Uncle Man said, and we didn't know this during the time, but when he's meeting with Fred Breezy in the Anglin family, when he's there in that meeting in '92, he makes a very interesting comment that one of his sisters asked about, well, how could they have gotten information outside of the prison? And he makes a comment. He said, well, all they had to do was find someone who was leaving Alcatraz, and they could have delivered the message out. I'm like going, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened. And he just told, I mean, how would he even know that? I mean, how often did people leave Alcatraz? I mean, it was a very small prison, very few individual prisoners there. It wasn't like a big prison today where everybody's coming and going every single day. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that you didn't have prisoners leaving every single day on Alcatraz.
No, especially from an island.
No.
You would probably I'd be shocked if you had one prisoner leaving every year.
Yeah.
So to even indicate or say that someone brought information off of the island, that was Mickey Cohen. He's the only one who has ever left Alcatraz in that way.
At that time period, yeah.
At that time period. You're exactly
well, and also
right.
to add to the story is, Ken's uncle lived in Florida his whole life, and
Right.
Mickey Cohen on the East Coast, and Mickey Cohen's stationed out on the West Coast, out in Los Angeles. That was his base of operations. So he's 3,000 miles away. How would he have even heard of him?
Exactly. And he was a construction worker. He had no affiliation whatsoever. I mean, that's also the argument about the brothers and how they would connect to them. I mean, they never left that area of Florida.
No.
The only time they left was when they went to go meet him.
Yeah. So, yeah, think about that. You got these poor families. We talked about how poor this family was. They had no money. John and Clarence, supposedly if they're just working as farm laborers, they're making 25 cents an hour. Can you really see someone like that jumping in a car and driving all the way to Los Angeles, California, and then going up into San Francisco and then coming back with all this cash? But supposedly all they are is just farm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Explain to me how that.
Doesn't make sense.
No.
And the thing is, these are not just stories. We've put on this podcast. You've seen the photographs of them heading out to California in a beat up car with suitcases strapped to the back of the trunk.
Look like the Beverly Hillbillies.
Yeah, it did. It looked like the Beverly Hillbillies. It's like t-shirts and jeans. Yeah. And they chronicle their whole trip out there. So it's not like they document their trip to go see Mickey Cohen, like tourists.
Right.
I mean, it's
and then when they come back, you look at photos, and now all of a sudden they're not wearing dungarees and dirty clothes. They're dressed in very nice suits, patent leather shoes, driving expensive cars. As like my mom said, they had cash. John walked in that night. She said, with a roll of cash, it was, that's her words, big enough to choke a horse.
Yeah.
That was the way they said it back then. But I'm assuming it's like that,
Yeah.
And so, they're just flushed with all this cash. Well, where did that come from? You tell me.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
And then also to add to that, we've talked before when they got arrested, Clarence, when he signed into the local motel, he signed Los Angeles as his home address, and the car that he had was registered in California. So again, the California connection. Well, if he's saying Los Angeles was his address, Mickey Cohen's in Los Angeles. So again, it connects not directly but indirectly to Mickey Cohen.
Yeah, there was no reason for them to head to Los Angeles.
No.
And I told you one time I had AI check GPT do what are the odds if an individual could take an address and give it, the exact address, the street number, the name of the address in a city that you have never visited before in your life. And it was like 1 in 10 million.
And there was no internet.
Clarence did this.
There was no internet back then.
No,
they didn't have anything.
No, none whatsoever. And he was able to write down the address that I still believe that they were headed. If they had not got arrested in Ohio, one of their next stops would have been that address.
The address, the one in Downey.
The one in Downey. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a house, so they undoubtedly had access to it, and it's still there today.
Yep, it's still there today. We found the records, and it's still there. The real estate records. All right. Well, we didn't get a chance to go through all these questions, but I think it begs another session. So maybe next week we can talk about more questions. And if any listeners are listening now, send us more questions. This has been great because it kind of validates it from a different angle, and we like to hear what you guys have to say. And in this incredible quest to find these answers, and we will continue to update you on our investigation. I was getting some texts while we were on the phone regarding some information, which hopefully will be fruitful. So it's live and going. So until next week, guys, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Great to
Thank
see
you.
you.
All right.
When you sign up at Work Money, you could win $50,000. With the average renter paying around $2,100 per month, that means you can have rent covered for a whole year and more. So you can be more. And when you're more, that means you get more. And more. Ooh, but not so much of that. Sign up at Work Money. Get money-saving tips. Skip the rent. Get more rich. Sign up at workmoney.org/more-rich contest for your chance to win $50,000.